Hi guys, it's Ankita. Welcome to another video. If you're new here, hi, how are you? Today in this video, I'm going to review Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This video contains no spoiler, although I am planning to do a video with spoilers as well. But in this video, we have no spoilers. So fret not if you have not read the book. This book was first published in 1938 and was Daphne du Maurier's fifth novel and one of her most famous. In this book, our narrator, who is also our protagonist, she tells us of the time when she was around 21 years of age, and she was a companion to a woman named Mrs. Van Hopper. Now you might ask, what does it mean by a companion to a woman? Well, that means our protagonist was basically paid by this woman to keep her company. She would do quite trivial tasks for the lady and also just keep her company. That was basically her job. So when our protagonist and her companion, Mrs. Van Hopper, are at this hotel in Monte Carlo, they meet a gentleman named Maxime de Winter, who is a widower. And this gentleman is pretty wealthy. He is also the owner of a very beautiful property in Cornwall, and the name of the property is Manderley. Obviously, this property does not actually exist in Cornwall. It's very much fictional, but this property plays a huge role in the plot and the story that unfolds in this book. In a matter of a few days, our protagonist falls in love with Maxime de Winter, and she marries him soon after, and they both then go back to Maxime's home in Cornwall, that is at Manderley. So when she arrives at Manderley, our protagonist soon finds out that the Mrs. de Winter, or the ex-wife of her husband, haunts her day and night. Now, by haunting, I don't mean like in the ghostly fashion, in the horror fashion. What I mean is that the ex-wife, whose name was Rebecca, she had a really huge personality and she was friendly, and now that she's dead, everyone seems to miss her, and no one is basically afraid to tell the new Mrs. de Winter, our protagonist, about how much they used to love Rebecca and how much they missed her now that she is no longer with them. Now, our protagonist, who is really awkward, shy, she does not come from a prominent family, and she already has this fear of how she's going to cope with being Mrs. de Winter and, managing the new household. And on top of that, she is bullied and made to feel like she is not perfect like Rebecca was, So what starts as a really dreamy romance turns into a complicated marriage where she feels like her husband is still very much in love with his ex-wife, Rebecca. From the synopsis, you might have already deduced that it does sound a little bit like Jane Eyre, a young woman falling in love with a man who's twice her age. Sounds very much like Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester. I'm sorry, I think I forgot to tell you that Mr. Maxime de Winter is actually twice our protagonist's age, so there's like a lot of difference between them. Having said that, this book is so much more and so much more different than Jane Eyre, so don't go into it thinking that this is going to be exactly like Jane Eyre. There are a lot of similarities, but it is very different. Now, what did I like and what's so different about this book is the narration. Now, we never learn the name of our protagonist, who is also our narrator. We never learn her name, and that does not make a difference at all in this book. So I actually liked this technique a lot of having of us being connected to this protagonist who is telling her story, and us being so involved in the narrator's story and never knowing her name. Despite of that, she does leave an imprint on your heart and your soul. You will never forget this narrator. I feel it's a very intelligent technique. I'm pretty sure it was uncommon back then, and possibly Rebecca and possibly Daphne du Maurier was the first one to implement this technique, where we never find out the name of the narrator and the narration is in first person. Although you will find that technique has been used by many writers after that, and it is a brilliant technique, and I think it works really well for how the story unfolds, and I think it just adds to that psychological aspect that unfolds later on in this story. Next thing that I liked is our narrator daydreams all the time. She daydreams so much that you have to keep track of what's actually happening and what is a daydream and what is just her imagination, and sometimes it just becomes too funny. Like I said, what begins as a really dreamy romance turns into a story of a complicated marriage and a woman figuring out how to adjust to that new role of being Mrs. De Winter. And after that, there comes a point in the book, I think it was at 65 or 70% mark, where this one incident takes place. Actually, it's not even an incident, it's like this one revelation is the right word, I think. We find out something, and it was just like I had to pause and like take a moment to just like let that sink in, that knowledge, that revelation sink in, because it changed my perspective of everything that had happened before in the book. Yeah, it was quite interesting. I had to like, whoa, what just happened? And I enjoyed that moment. I took some time. I just like placed the book aside and I was like, let me just like let this moment sink in, because there's like never going to be that moment is never going to return. I am definitely going to reread this book, but I know that I will not have that reaction the second time I'm going to read it, because it's suspense, right? So there's this suspense element in this book, and after that revelation, this like becomes into a psychological thriller, and it's very interesting. It's a very different psychological thriller, because you will start questioning the psyche of the characters in this book, and you will start rooting for these characters who have done some abhorrent things, like really like unforgivable things. And at that moment, when you find yourself rooting for these characters who have done like unforgivable things, at that time you must pause and question your own psyche. Like, why are you rooting for these characters? And if you find yourself in that wicked pool of supporting the wicked characters or wicked actions of the characters, I would say just forgive yourself. It's not you. It is the absolute brilliance of Daphne du Maurier's amazing narration that makes you do that. It just shows how good the author is for evoking those emotions in us, for evoking that side of us, which is so crooked that it wants to support these wrong actions, the wrong actions that take place in the book. So be kind and forgive yourself, and blame Daphne du Maurier's brilliant writing for the things you're feeling, the things you might feel when you're reading this book. I think this book is for everyone, because not only does it have a good plot, actually a brilliant plot, but it is very much character driven as well because of narration style. So if you are one of those people who fall into the category of those who love plot, a strong plot, and then those who love like character driven stories, I think this book is like a beautiful amalgamation of both. Another thing I liked about this book is like I talked about the technique, right, where we don't even find out the name of our protagonist, who is also our narrator. And our protagonist is very much flawed, and despite of that, you'll feel for her. You really truly feel for the character. Sometimes you'll be annoyed, sometimes you'll just want to give her a hug and comfort her. So it's beautifully done. Now this book, Rebecca, is not only a gothic romance with the themes of death, love, and suspense, the typical themes that you find in gothic romance books, but it has deeper themes as well of the identity of women. There's duality. And when you read this book, right, and if you read this book, and I urge you to read this book, you will find a lot of differences in the first Mrs. De Winter and our protagonist, who's the second Mrs. De Winter. So you find a lot of differences in them, and those are like stark differences, which you don't even have to make an effort to dig into. But when you do that, you must also look for the similarities, which are quite subtle. And that makes this a very interesting book because it stays with you. It's like it's a story that will stay with you forever. I say this many times in my videos that, especially when I'm talking about classics, is that there are a lot of people out there who don't want to read classics because they feel like they are dense, which is true. Classics can be, most of the classics have dense texts, they are slow, they are difficult to read, but this one is definitely not one of them. This is like, I think, one of the simplest classics to read. And it's also fun because it's, you know, it's suspense, it's a thriller, it's really good. It's a very good classic to pick if you are not used to reading classics. I like that the narration is simple, and this is in no way to say that the author is not good at writing dense text or not good at writing flowery text. From experience, I can tell you it is more difficult to write in simple sentences than it is to write complex and flowery language in dense text. So I definitely mean this as a compliment. I have not read other books by Daphne du Maurier, so I don't know what her writing style is. But in this book, it's really simple, and it could be because our narrator, she knows that she's young, she speaks like a little girl, and since she's narrating our book, you know, maybe that might be one of the reasons why the text is so simple. If you've read any of the books by Daphne du Maurier, and if you know that all of her books are simple, please leave a comment down below. Not only would it be helpful for me, but also for others who are looking for easier classics. Nonetheless, the descriptions of the property, right, which is like a very gothic setting. The descriptions are so beautiful of the gardens and the woods around that surround this property, Manderley. I ended up giving this book 5 stars, and honestly, I know for sure that I'm going to reread this book. I won't be rereading it anytime soon. I want to let some time go by because it's a suspense and a thriller. So maybe possibly a decade or two later, I'll definitely reread this book. Alright guys, that is all that I have to say about this book without giving away any spoilers. If you have read this book or if you're planning to read this book, and if you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comment down below. You can also email me, and I will leave my email in the description below. I would really love to hear your thoughts. Alright, thank you for watching this video. If you've not already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button down below. And as always, don't forget to like and share this video with your friends and family, and I'll see you next time. Until then, au revoir.